What if the only song you remembered from childhood suddenly returned to you sung by a stranger in the most unlikely place? For one man, that melody unlocked a past buried in shadows and changed his life forever. Jonathan Hale was 40 years old, and by every public measure, he had conquered the world. His name was whispered with awe on Wall Street, spoken with caution in boardrooms stretching from New York to Los Angeles. He controlled vast companies, moved markets with a phone call, and owned properties that shone like monuments to wealth. Yet in the still hours of the night behind the glass walls of his penthouse high above Manhattan, he was alone. The apartment itself was a shrine to modern design, marble floors polished to a mirror sheen, steel fixtures that gleamed like cold fire, and paintings that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime. Everything was curated to perfection, and yet the space felt like a museum where no one lived. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the city far below. Jonathan would often stand by the vast windows, the skyline sprawled at his feet like a jeweled circuit board. People called him a king of finance, but in that solitude, the word king felt hollow. What was an empire worth when it had no warmth, no memory, no blood to anchor it? Around his neck hung the only possession he valued beyond the numbers on a ledger. Hidden beneath tailored shirts and silk ties, a small silver locket rested against his chest. Its surface was worn with age, engraved with a weeping willow, bowing beneath a crescent moon. Inside, there was no photograph, no name, just emptiness. It was the single thread tying him to a mother he never knew. Along with the locket came something more fragile, something more haunting, a melody. A lullaby with no words, just a few notes that drifted through the fog of his earliest memories. In the dead of night, when the city's roar quieted to a hum, Jonathan could almost hear it soft, fragile, as if someone just beyond reach was still singing to him. He had spent fortunes trying to trace it. Musicologists, historians, folklorists, none could find its origin. They all agreed it was unique. Not a folk song, not a hymn, not something carried across centuries. It was personal. A family song. His family's song. And yet, he had no family to ask. No mother to remember, no father to explain, no siblings to hum the missing words. Just a man standing in a palace of glass, haunted by a melody that belonged to no one else in the world. The empire of Jonathan Hale was vast, but it was built on silence. And in that silence, a song waited a promise that the past would not remain buried forever. The storm rolled in over New York like a living thing. Rain hammered the streets in silver sheets, beating against windshields and soaking the sidewalks in minutes. For most, it was a night to stay inside. But for Jonathan Hale, it was the kind of night he craved, wild, untamed drowning out the silence that followed him everywhere. He had left behind another hollow victory, another boardroom conquest where the numbers on a screen bent to his will. His executives were celebrating at a restaurant in Midtown, glasses raised to toast their iron-fisted leader. Jonathan should have been there, the conquering hero. Instead, he slid behind the wheel of his vintage Ford Thunderbird, the one car he drove himself. No chauffeur, no security detail. Just him, the storm, and the restless ache in his chest. The wipers struggled against the downpour as he steered aimlessly through the city. Midtown's neon lights blurred into streaks of color on wet glass. He cut across the bridge into Brooklyn, into neighborhoods where the glow of wealth gave way to rows of tired brownstones and shuttered shops. It felt like another world, one he had not seen in years. Then, as if mocking his wealth, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. He cursed under his breath. The Thunderbird was a collector's dream, a machine tuned with obsessive care. Yet here he was, a billionaire stranded in the rain. Through the sheets of water, a warm glow appeared at the corner of the street. A neon sign buzzed and flickered, the Maple Spoon. Its red letters fought bravely against the storm. The place looked worn down, almost forgotten, but inviting in its stubborn light. Jonathan pulled up his coat collar and dashed through the rain. A bell over the door chimed as he stepped inside. The diner was small, narrow-lined with red vinyl booths, and a counter polished by decades of elbows. The air smelled of frying bacon, strong coffee, and something sweet, maybe cinnamon. A jukebox stood silent in the corner, its chrome dulled with age. The kind of place where regulars had their names carved into stools, where every story was written in spilled coffee and late-night conversations. Jonathan felt the stares the moment he entered. His tailored coat and expensive shoes looked out of place among worn jackets and rain-spotted umbrellas. But he ignored it, sliding into a booth near the back. An older man with a kind, weathered face shuffled over a name tag reading, "Walter. Nasty night," he said, voice low and friendly. "Coffee?" Jonathan answered, his tone clipped. Black, as Walter poured. Jonathan's eyes wandered. And then he froze. Across the diner, in a corner booth, a young woman sat with a child cradled against her shoulder. She wore a faded waitress uniform, neat but tired, her hair pulled back hastily. Her little boy stirred restlessly, fighting sleep. The woman bent close, her lips near his ear, and began to hum. Jonathan's heart stopped. It was the melody, not the fragment that haunted his nights. Not the ghostly echo he could only half remember. It was whole, complete, flowing like water from her lips, each note falling into place with a certainty that struck him like lightning. The diner's noises, the clatter of forks, the hiss of the coffee machine, the relentless drumming of rain faded into nothing. All that remained was the sound of that impossible song. Then she began to sing. Her voice was untrained, but pure, wrapped in love. Words filled the air, words Jonathan had never known. The willow weeps, but not in sorrow. He sheds his leaves for a new tomorrow. Every syllable unlocked something buried deep inside him, a door breaking open after decades. His hand trembled against the ceramic mug. His chest ached. It wasn't possible. And yet it was happening right here in a run-down diner sung by a stranger to her sleepy child. Jonathan Hale, the master of markets. The king of finance, could only sit frozen, staring across the room at a young mother who carried the song of his soul. And for the first time in years, he was not in control. For a long moment, Jonathan did not move. The song wound its way through him like a river, long dammed, finally breaking loose. His hand, strong enough to sign contracts worth billions, now shook against a coffee cup. He could not look away from the woman across the diner. When the final note faded, silence fell heavy in his chest. The child, soothed, had slipped into sleep. The young woman pressed a kiss to her son's forehead, her expression tender, weary, but radiant in its devotion. She looked up and found Jonathan staring. Her eyes narrowed. She shifted protective, drawing the boy closer. He rose slowly, each step carrying the weight of a lifetime. At her booth, he stopped, a towering figure shadowing the small table. His voice was rough, unsteady, carrying more desperation than command. "The song," he said. "Where did you learn it?" The woman blinked, confused. "Excuse me." "That lullaby. The words. The melody." His tone sharpened. "It's not just a lullaby. It's mine. My family's." "Where did you hear it?" Her jaw tightened. "That was my grandmother's song," she said firmly. "She sang it to my mother. My mother sang it to me. Now I sing it to my son. It belongs to our family." Jonathan's chest constricted. Anger sparked, but beneath it, fear that this fragile thread might slip away. He reached beneath his shirt fingers, closing around cold metal, and pulled out the silver locket. He laid it on the table between them. Under the diner's fluorescent light, the engraving gleamed faintly, the weeping willow, and crescent moon. The woman's breath caught. Her eyes widened, recognition flashing like lightning. She leaned closer, whispering as if speaking to herself. The willow and the moon. Jonathan studied her face. Your grandmother, he said quietly. Who was she? The woman hesitated, torn between suspicion and something else. Finally, she answered. Margaret Dawson. She passed 2 years ago. She used to draw this symbol on napkins, in journals. She said it meant waiting for someone you loved. The name hit Jonathan like a spark in the dark. His pulse thundered. For decades he had searched, and here across a cracked vinyl booth was the first real clue. He sat down opposite her. My name is Jonathan Hale, he said, lowering his voice. I was left at St. Jude's foundling home as an infant. This locket is the only thing I have of my mother, and that melody, the fragment of it, has haunted me my whole life. Until tonight, I believed I was the only one who knew it existed. The woman looked at him long and hard, gauging the truth in his words. Something in his expression, the raw, unguarded ache, softened her. She glanced down at her sleeping child, then back at him. My name is Claire, she said at last. Claire Dawson. And if what you're saying is true, maybe my grandmother knew more than she ever told us. Jonathan leaned forward, the locket gleaming between them. Then help me. Please. Everything she left behind, letters, journals, drawings, anything. If the song passed from her to you, then the key to my past might still be in her hands, waiting for us to find it. Claire hesitated, suspicion warring with curiosity. She was a single mother, scraping by on double shifts. The man across from her was a billionaire, a stranger with storm-gray eyes and an intensity that made her skin prickle. But the locket was undeniable. So was the song. My grandmother kept everything she said slowly. Boxes, trunks. She never threw anything away. Her house in Queens is still full of it all. I never had the time or the heart to sort through it. Jonathan's eyes burned with urgency. Then that's where we start. Walter, the diner owner, approached cautiously, sensing the tension. Everything all right here? Claire straightened, protective once more. We're fine, Walter. Jonathan slipped the locket back beneath his shirt, his gaze never leaving hers. For the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of purpose. The melody was no longer just a ghost. It was alive, woven through the history of a family not his own, and yet somehow deeply his. And so in the quiet corner of a rain-soaked diner, an unlikely pact was forged, a billionaire adrift and a weary young mother bound together by a song that refused to be forgotten. The house in Queens sat like a time capsule. 2 stories of weathered brick shutters sagging, the kind of home that carried generations of quiet lives. Rain had eased into a mist as Jonathan and Claire climbed the creaking steps, her son tucked under her arm, still half asleep. She fumbled with the key, hesitating at the threshold. I haven't been back here since the funeral, she murmured. It's like walking into her shadow. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust, lavender, and old paper. Furniture slumbered beneath white sheets, and framed photographs lined the mantel, their silver edges tarnished with time. Claire's voice softened. Grandma Margaret never threw anything away. She said every object had a story. I thought it was just her excuse for clutter. Jonathan scanned the room like a man entering a sacred place. His heart thudded, as though the walls themselves might whisper the secrets he had chased his whole life. They climbed to the attic. The narrow stairs groaned beneath their weight until they reached a low-ceilinged space lit by a single dusty window. In the corner beneath, layers of neglect, sat a dark wooden trunk bound with brass straps. Its presence filled the room like a sentinel. Claire crouched beside it, her hands trembling. She called this her memory chest. Jonathan knelt to opposite, and for a brief instant their eyes met hers, wary his aflame with urgency. Together, they pulled the latch. The lid creaked open, and a draft of air heavy with age escaped into the attic. The top layer held the predictable keepsakes of a long-life baby shoes browned with time. A christening gown, yellowed with age, pressed flowers sealed between sheets of wax paper. Claire handled each piece gently, her eyes glistening with memories. Then came the bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon sepia photographs of faces Jonathan did not recognize. And at the bottom, lying in velvet, lining a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover bore a single initial embossed in fading gold, M. Margaret Claire whispered. They carried it downstairs to the living room. Jonathan's hands shook as he helped her turn the first brittle pages. The handwriting was elegant loops and flourishes that spoke of another era. At first, the entries were simple accounts of daily chores, small joys, dreams never spoken aloud. But then a shift. October 1968. I begin today as lady's maid at the Ashworth estate on Long Island. A palace of stone and ivy. My charge is Catherine Ashworth, only 17, but lonely beyond her years. Her father, Edward Ashworth, is cold as marble. Yet Catherine, she has laughter like wind chimes. I think we will be friends. Jonathan leaned forward, his pulse quickening. The name struck like a bell, Catherine Ashworth. Entry after entry unfolded their friendship, Catherine confiding in Margaret, slipping out of the estate to meet a young painter named Daniel Rowan. Margaret's words painted Daniel as poor in coin, but rich in soul, a man with eyes like a universe. Then came the entry that nearly stopped Jonathan's breath. July 22nd, 1969. Catherine is with child. Daniel's child. She is terrified and elated at once. Her father would never allow it. Tonight, Daniel composed a lullaby for the baby. Catherine wrote the words. It is called "The Willow Weeps for the Moon," the most beautiful, heartbreaking song I have ever heard. Jonathan's hands clenched around the page. His lullaby, his mother's words, his father's music. The entries darkened. Edward Ashworth grew suspicious, forbade Catherine to leave the estate. Then rage. March 14th, 1970. He found out. He dragged her away. Called Daniel a worthless degenerate. Said the baby would be dealt with. I fear for her. For him. For the child. Claire's voice trembled as she read the next, her eyes wet. March 18th. Catherine is gone. Edward has hidden her. He told me if I spoke, I would lose everything. The baby was born 2 days ago. A boy. I saw him once. He has Catherine's eyes. A nurse took him bound for St. Jude's Foundling Home. Catherine pressed the silver locket into my hands and begged me to see that her son had it. It is all she could do. The pages ended there. Jonathan sat motionless, the words carving through him like blades. His entire life, his loneliness, his search, and the song suddenly had a name, a face, a story of love and betrayal. His mother had not abandoned him. She had fought. She had been silenced. Claire closed the diary, her tears falling freely. All these years, Grandma carried this secret. She must have been waiting for the right moment, but she never found it. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his breath unsteady. Catherine Ashworth, he whispered. She's alive. She has to be. There's no record of her death. If Edward locked her away, then I will find her. No matter what it takes. For the first time in decades, Jonathan's emptiness filled with fire. The past was no longer a mystery, it was a theft, and he would reclaim it. Long Island lay gray, beneath a sky of low clouds. The Ashworth estate rose above the Sound like a citadel of another age, stone walls veined with ivy, tall iron gates that groaned as they opened, and a drive lined with maples stripped bare by winter. Jonathan's car swept through those gates, flanked by a single escort vehicle. Beside him sat Claire, her hands folded tight in her lap, eyes fixed on the sprawling mansion ahead. In the back seat, Michael Reed, Jonathan's trusted head of security, watched everything with the stillness of a hawk. Jonathan had imagined this place for years, though, never with such fury in his chest. Here was the house where his mother had grown up, where laughter had been smothered, where a young woman had dared to love and paid with her freedom. The butler who answered the door was stiff gray and wordless, ushering them into a cavernous library. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines gleaming but untouched. A fire crackled, yet the room felt cold as though the warmth stopped at the hearth. Behind a vast mahogany desk sat Edward Ashworth. At 92, he was skeletal, but sharp, his back straight as iron. A shock of white hair framed a face carved by decades of power, and his pale blue eyes, so piercingly familiar, fixed on Jonathan the way a falcon sizes up prey. He did not rise. Mr. Hale, Edward said, his voice dry, papery, but strong. "I am told you demanded this meeting. I am a busy man. Speak your purpose." Jonathan stepped forward, unflinching. He removed the silver locket from around his neck and placed it on the desk with deliberate care. Edward's eyes flickered the faintest crack in his mask. He leaned back, folding thin fingers together. "A trinket," he said. "If you've come to sell me something, you've wasted a journey." Jonathan's voice was low, steady. "It belonged to your daughter Catherine, my mother." The room stilled. Claire's breath caught. Even Michael shifted, sensing the shift in gravity. Edward's eyes narrowed, the firelight reflecting off them like shards of ice. For a moment, silence pressed down, broken only by the pop of burning logs. Finally, the old man spoke, his words dipped in contempt. "So, the child survived." The statement, not a question, fell like a stone. Jonathan's jaw clenched. "You tore her life apart. You locked her away. You threw her son into an orphanage like garbage." Edward's lips curved into something like amusement. "And yet, here you stand. Strong, ruthless, successful. You are what you are because I removed you from her weakness." From him, Jonathan stepped closer, fury burning. "You call love weakness. My father was an artist. He gave her joy. They wrote a song together, a lullaby for me. That is not weakness. That is life." Edward's gaze sharpened, calculating. "Your father was a penniless dreamer. He had nothing to offer but sketches and empty promises. He polluted my daughter's bloodline. I did what was necessary. I preserved our name." "Preserved," Jonathan spat. "You destroyed her. You buried her alive in a sanitarium for 50 years. She's still there, isn't she?" Edward's expression did not flinch, but his silence was answer enough. Claire, trembling, found her voice. "You didn't just punish Catherine. You punished generations. You silenced her, and my grandmother carried that silence until it killed her. Do you feel nothing?" The old man turned his gaze to her, icy and dismissive. "You are no one in this matter. A servant's grandchild." Stay silent, as she should have. Claire's face blanched. But Jonathan stepped closer to the desk, towering over the frail patriarch. His voice dropped into a growl. "You tried to erase me. You failed. I am here, and I will not rest until my mother is free." Edward leaned forward, eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "Free. She is nothing now. Years of care, of treatment, have left her docile. She would not even know your face. Why disturb her? Leave her in peace." Jonathan's chest heaved. "Peace. You call imprisonment and silence peace. You're afraid. Afraid that if she sees me, if she hears the song, she will remember, and the world will know what you did." Edward's composure cracked. His voice rose sharp as glass. I am afraid of nothing, least of all some bastard child with delusions of sentimentality. Leave now, or I will destroy you as I destroyed your father." The words hung like a blade. Jonathan held his stare, unyielding. Then he turned, walking toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped, looking back over his shoulder. His voice rang through the cavernous room. "You didn't get rid of the artist's son. You created a rival. And I will not stop until she is free." The door shut behind him with a final echo. In that moment, the lines were drawn. The old patriarch had his wealth, his lawyers, his influence. But Jonathan Hale carried something Edward had never counted on. A lifetime of hunger, the truth of a stolen past, and a lullaby that refused to be silenced. 2 weeks later, the fight moved from whispers in law offices to the marble halls of a New York courthouse. Jonathan's legal team, guided by Reed's relentless research, pressed a little-known amendment to state healthcare law. No patient, even under guardianship, could be denied access to a direct blood relative without the ruling of an independent court physician. DNA results left no doubt Jonathan Hale was Catherine Ashworth's son. Edward's lawyers fought like wolves, citing decades of medical stability. But the judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Maria Hernandez, listened in silence as Jonathan placed Margaret's journal on the table. Claire swore her affidavit, and the locket, tarnished but undeniable, gleamed like an ancient key. When the gavel finally struck, the ruling was clear. Jonathan had the right to see his mother. The drive north to Briarwood Sanitarium was long and silent. Pines flanked the winding road, and their dark spires brushing against a low, gray sky. The facility itself resembled a country estate, grand serene, built to soothe wealthy families who wished to hide their broken branches from the world. Behind its manicured gardens lay decades of stolen time. An administrator met them at the entrance, lips thin with disapproval, but powerless before the court order. She led them down a hushed corridor where carpet muffled every step. At the end stood a heavy oak door. She paused, her tone clinical. "She has good days and bad days. Do not expect too much." The door opened. Catherine Ashworth sat in an armchair by the window, a pale cashmere blanket over her lap. Her hair, once dark, was now a snowy crown, cut short, her face delicate and lined. Her blue eyes, so like Edward's yet stripped of cruelty, gazed into the garden without recognition. She was beautiful still, but distant, like a portrait fading in the sun. Jonathan froze. Every instinct screamed to run forward, to kneel and gather her into his arms. Yet his body felt carved from stone. Slowly, he stepped across the room, his heart hammering like a drum. "Catherine!" His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "Mother, my name is Jonathan. I'm your son." The woman's gaze drifted toward him. For a flicker of a moment, something stirred, then vanished. Her lips parted, polite confusion in her expression, as if he were a stranger interrupting her quiet. Jonathan's knees hit the carpet. He reached for her frail hands, but they lay limp in her lap. Tears burned his eyes. "I've searched for you all my life. I thought you were gone. Please just look at me. See me." But there was nothing. Only silence and the faint hum of the garden beyond the glass. Behind him, Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. She had seen Jonathan battle titans of industry with fire in his veins, but now he looked like a lost boy in a storm. She thought of her grandmother, of secrets carried like heavy stones, and something inside her refused to let this moment wither into despair. Quietly, she began to sing. "The willow weeps, but not in sorrow. He sheds his leaves for a new tomorrow." Her voice was soft, trembling at first, then steady. The melody floated into the room, carrying with it generations of love, grief, and hope. At the first note, Catherine's head tilted. Her lips trembled. Her fingers twitched against the blanket. Jonathan's breath caught. Claire's voice grew stronger, tears streaming down her face. "The river flows to meet the sea. My dearest love, come back to me." A sound escaped Catherine's throat, a ragged, forgotten note. Then slowly, her lips shaped the words. Her voice, hoarse from years of silence, rose to join the song. "The crescent moon, a silver tear shines for the one I hold so dear." Jonathan gasped, clutching her hand. Her eyes cleared the fog, breaking like a dawn. She looked at him, truly looked, and in that gaze was recognition, sharp and overwhelming. Her voice faltered, but she whispered through the tears streaming down her cheeks, "Robert." Jonathan shook his head, choking on emotion. "No, I'm Jonathan, your son." Recognition bloomed. Memories flooded back, breaking through decades of suppression. Her face crumpled as she reached for him with trembling arms. "My baby. My beautiful boy." Jonathan collapsed into her embrace, holding her fragile frame as though he might never let go. The world beyond that room ceased to exist. He was no longer the Titan of Wall Street. He was a son, finally home. Claire stood back, her own sobs, silent, bearing witness to the miracle her grandmother had prayed for, but never lived to see. The lullaby, silenced for half a century, had done what power and wealth could not. It had bridged the chasm of time, carried love across generations, and resurrected a bond the world had tried to bury. And in that small, sunlit room of briarwood, the willow and the moon no longer wept in sorrow. They sang in reunion. 6 months later, the penthouse on the 85th floor was no longer a mausoleum of marble and silence. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, no longer harsh, but warm, filtered by curtains that Catherine herself had chosen. The polished floors, once echoing with emptiness, now bore the scatter of children's toys and the scratch of crayons against paper. Jonathan Hale walked through his home as if seeing it for the first time. The sterile art pieces were gone, replaced with framed sketches by his father, Daniel Rowan pieces tracked down and recovered from private collections around the country. On the refrigerator, Cody's colorful drawings were pinned with magnets, messy towers of blocks and bright suns with smiling faces. Their value, Jonathan thought, was beyond any auction. From the sunroom came the murmur of voices. Catherine sat in a wicker chair by the window, her hair now silver, but her eyes bright again, free of the fog that had once held her prisoner. She wore a soft shawl across her shoulders, a faint smile touching her lips as she traced the lines of a charcoal portrait. It was of a young woman with hopeful eyes, Catherine herself drawn decades ago by Daniel. Claire entered carrying a tray with tea and oatmeal cookies. She placed it on the table, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Catherine looked up at her and said softly, "He always saw the hope, even when all I felt was fear." Jonathan joined them, resting a hand on his mother's shoulder. "And you kept it alive," he said. Claire smiled, her eyes glistening. "My grandmother used to tell me that Daniel carried a universe in his eyes. Looking at these sketches, I think she was right." The three sat in quiet companionship, their silence no longer heavy, but full. It was the silence of belonging. Not long before the news had reached them that Edward Ashworth had passed away in his sleep. No headlines, no public mourning, just silence. The man who had once moved empires with a glare had died alone, surrounded by his library of unread books. There was no celebration in the Hale household, no toasts or speeches. Only a quiet acknowledgement his reign of cruelty was over. His empire, built on control and fear, dissolved with him. Jonathan reached for the locket on the table. He turned it over in his hand, feeling the familiar grooves of the willow and the moon. "I never knew what picture belonged inside," he said, his voice steady but thoughtful. Catherine's fingers brushed the silver, tender and knowing. "Daniel gave this to me," she said. He told me it wasn't meant to hold the past. It was meant to hold the promise of the future. She looked to her son, and then to Claire, and finally toward Cody, who was in the living room building a precarious tower of blocks. Her eyes shone with tears not of sorrow, but of gratitude. And here it is. A future more beautiful than I ever dreamed. Jonathan closed his fist around the locket, the weight of it no longer heavy with absence, but alive with meaning. He understood now, while the lullaby had never been about waiting in grief. It was about enduring in hope. It was about tomorrow. In the months that followed, Jonathan established the Rowan Ashworth Foundation, dedicated to supporting young artists and fighting for the rights of patients in long-term care. Each program carried the quiet mark of his parents' legacy art for resilience, advocacy for dignity. A way to give back what had once been stolen. And at home, life unfolded in ways wealth could never buy. Catherine's laughter, once lost, now filled the rooms. Claire's steady presence became an anchor. Cody's small footsteps echoed down hallways that had once known only silence. Jonathan often found himself pausing at the window, gazing at the city he had once ruled with cold detachment. The skyline had not changed, but he had. He no longer saw a kingdom to conquer. He saw a backdrop to a life finely lived. One evening, as twilight deepened and the city lights blinked alive, Jonathan sat at the piano he had purchased, but never played. Claire settled beside him. Catherine leaned close, her voice soft, and together they began to sing. The lullaby rose again, not a fragment, but whole a song carried across generations. The willow weeps, but not in sorrow. He sheds his leaves for a new tomorrow. Cody, hearing the melody, climbed into Jonathan's lap. His small voice, off-key but fearless, joined theirs. Jonathan's chest swelled with something greater than triumph, greater than wealth. He had discovered the truth, yes, but more than that, he had discovered family. The empire of marble and glass was no longer empty. It was a home. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan Hale understood true wealth. It was not found in numbers or deals or towers of steel. It was found in voices joined in song in hands, held across time in love, that endured every attempt to bury it. The willow and the moon had kept their promise. Love had returned stronger than before. And so Jonathan's story ends not with a fortune gained, but with a family restored. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are not the ones we build, but the ones we find waiting for us, hidden in the quiet echoes of a song. If this story moved, you share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them. And if you want to join us for more stories like this, subscribe. Because some stories are too important to be forgotten, and every voice deserves to be heard.